All right, let's get right into it. When you come across a really deep work of art or philosophy, your first instinct is to figure it out, right? But what if the tools we're using, our modern tools, are actually getting in the way? Today, we're looking at a principle that kind of flips the whole script. It's a specific hierarchy for interpretation, one that says you have to listen to a tradition in its own voice first.
And this is the big challenge, isn't it? I mean, think about the poetry of someone like Rumi or the verses of Rabindranath Tagore. How do we get to their true depth without, accidentally slathering our own 21st century ideas all over them? It's a question of fairness, really, and of getting it right. And for that, you need a system.
So, here we are, wanting to understand these incredible works. And it's not like we don't have tools. We've got literary criticism, psychology, historical analysis, we have a ton of them. The real problem is figuring out which tool you should pick up first. Because if you choose the wrong tool at the start, you can warp the entire meaning. It's kind of like trying to open one of those old ornate locks with a hammer. Sure, you might force it open, but you'll absolutely destroy the delicate mechanism inside. So this framework we're talking about, the Hermeneutics of Parallelism, or HoP, says there is a very specific and correct order to do things. And the very first rule of this framework is, well, it's incredibly simple, but also really profound. You always have to start from within the tradition of the work itself. Before you bring in any outside theory, you first have to look for the analytical tools that the tradition already made for itself. And here's a perfect example to make this real. If we're studying Tagore's masterpiece, Gitanjali, we don't kick things off with Freud or some other Western theorist. Nope. We start with concepts like rasa and Dhvani. These are interpretive theories that come directly from the Hindu Sanskrit literary world that Tagore was a part of. You use the tools that he and his culture would have actually understood. This quote just nails it. It really gets to the core of the philosophy. It's about intellectual respect. Before we jump in to analyze, before we even speak, we just listen. We let the tradition hand us its own dictionary, its own instruction manual for understanding. So these special internal tools, they actually have a formal name. It's called Theory Bantu Tradishi, which translates to Traditional Auxiliary Theory. We're just going to call it TB for short. The crucial thing to get here is that a TOB isn't some universal, one-size-fits-all kind of tool. Not at all. It is custom-made, born from the very same ground as the work we're trying to understand. It's the insider's view turned into a method. And this chart here lays out the golden rule. You can see it's a super clear hierarchy. The traditional auxiliary theory, TB, is always your number one. It's the go-to tool. Only if that's not available or it's not enough do you even think about moving on to something else. And this isn't just a suggestion. It's a core principle designed to get the most precise understanding possible. Let's make this even more concrete. For someone like Tagore in the Hindu tradition, the TB is Dhvani/rasa, which is all about aesthetics and suggested meaning. For Sufi mystic like Rumi, the right TB is Taʻwil, a kind of deep, allegorical interpretation. And for a Christian mystic, you might use motion, a framework for analyzing spiritual movements. See? Every tool is perfectly suited for its specific job. Okay, so this all leads to a really obvious question, right? What happens if a tradition just doesn't have a formal, written-down interpretive theory? What do you do when the tradition itself is kind of quiet on how to read its own stuff? Does the whole system just break down? No, not at all. The HoP framework actually has a plan B for this exact situation. It has a backup tool. But, and this is key, it's one you only use when you absolutely have to. And this backup tool is called Isyarat Pengalaman, or IP, which basically means experiential signals. Now, unlike the super specific TB, IP is designed to be universal. It looks for patterns in language, like paradoxes or weird descriptions of the body, that seem to pop up across all different cultures whenever people are trying to talk about these huge transformative experiences. So what do these signals actually look like? Well, you have things like cognitive paradox, where language seems to contradict itself to point to a bigger truth, or somatic transcendence, where the body is described in really unusual ways. These are basically universal markers of a certain kind of profound human experience. You can spot them in a Sufi text, a Zen koan, or a Christian mystic's journal. Okay, so let's put them side by side. It makes it really clear. TB is specific, comes from inside the tradition, and gives you super high precision. IP is universal, it's cross-traditional, and it's a bit more general. And that's exactly why the hierarchy is so important. TB is your primary tool, your preferred choice. IP is your backup. You always reach for the scalpel before you grab the Swiss Army knife.
So why go through all this trouble? Why does this whole tradition-first principle actually matter so much? Well, as we're about to see, it's about way more than just being tidy in your research.
First off, it's about intellectual fairness. It stops us from shoving a work into a box it was never meant to fit in. Second, it gets us closer to an authentic understanding because we're using the language and concepts that are native to the source. And finally, by respecting what's unique about each tradition first, it actually lets us build better, more honest bridges between them.
I just love this way of putting it. It really gets to the ethical heart of the whole thing. The goal is to build a bridge into someone else's world, to understand it on its own terms, not to just march in and plant our own flag. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on. This whole principle of listening from the inside first, of trying to understand something on its own terms before we judge or analyze it, it's a really powerful idea. And it makes you wonder, beyond just reading old texts, where else in our lives could this approach completely change how we see the world, and maybe even how we see each other?